Hey everyone, my name is Alexandra and I am a watercolor artist. Today I am going to be teaching you guys how to paint a beautiful painting of Christmas bells. This is something that if you guys want to use to decorate in your home this Christmas, it is such a lovely addition. I also just want to let you guys know that there will be no full-length tutorial on Christmas Day. The next tutorial will be another cozy Christmas card video on Monday the 23rd before Christmas. Otherwise, I will see you in January for our next full tutorial. With that said, let's get started on painting Christmas bells. Today for supplies, you guys will need 2 cups of water. I have one for clean, one for dirty water, a napkin for drying your paintbrush. For paintbrushes, I have Princeton rounds numbers 2, 6, and 8. Paper, I'm using Arches 140 pound cold press watercolor paper. And lastly for paints, I'm using a combination of Winsor and Newton Series 2 and Series 3 paints. You guys can use sort of whatever colors you want for things that we're going to be adding to this painting, but specifically for the bells themselves, it's helpful to have some sort of yellow gold type color and some sort of brown specifically. Let's get started with our painting. So what I've done to prep my page for my painting is essentially draw super faint on my paper where my bells are gonna go. So the idea is that I did an oval at the bottom of the 2 of them and sort of just a bell curved shape coming up above them. As I paint, you guys will be able to see better. I know it's a little tricky to see the lines right now, but the other thing that you guys can do to help you out with that is pull up some sort of reference photo. With that said, we are gonna start straight into painting our bells. So I'm gonna start with my number 8 brush, and I am gonna use a wet on wet technique to start. So I am gonna actually go over and add water everywhere that I want the top part of my bell to be. As soon as I add paint to this, you'll be able to see a little easier what I'm doing here. But the nice thing about using a wet on wet technique for this is that we can get some really nice blending and we'll be able to get some really good detail into this. So I want to be intentional on where I have my shadows on my bells as well as the light. So I am just gonna plan to stick my shadows on the right hand side here. So that's where I'm gonna be adding more of my darker paint. But to start, I'm gonna go in and I'm mixing really watered down version. I have a little bit of a mix of my yellow paint here as well as some of my burnt sienna, and I am just jumping right in and adding that where I've placed the water on my painting. Now we're gonna work relatively quickly just because we have to add all of our colors while this is still nice and wet. So going in to my paint, I'll mix the 2 again, the yellow and the burnt sienna. I'm just adding more layers into my bell. Okay, now I had mentioned that I want sort of the darker shadow to be on this right side here. I'm gonna switch to my number 6 paintbrush just because I want a little bit more control. So with that, I just wet it, and I'm actually gonna take away some of the yellow on my left-hand side here, just so that it looks a little bit more like it has some reflection to it. And then going into my brown paint, we're gonna go on this right-hand side and just add in that shading. Because of this curve right here, I can kind of shade along this line as well. And using my brush while it's wet, I can just work to sort of manipulate where that paint is going. Now, because these are bells specifically, I really want to give it that nice bright gold look. So we're going to add in more of that bright paint in. It's a hard sentence to say. And I'm just gonna keep that left side with that sort of more white spot there. And I can even curve this around a little bit where the bottom of my bell is. By mixing in with the brown, you're gonna give it that nice vintage look as well. And the reason for this curve here is because that's where the inside is gonna go. Yeah, but I'm gonna add just a touch more of this orangey color where this brown is here to give it sort of that nice copper tone to it. Can even add just a little bit on this other edge as well. And while we're doing that, we'll just paint our little circle for the actual part that's going to ring the bell, just so that we know where that's going to go. So while it's wet, exact same concept as the main part of my bell, where I'm adding in kind of that burnt orange and brown. Take some water away from that. To the side, and we can add even more depth into that as it dries. Okay, so we kind of have that first layer of our bell done. I wanted to do 2 bells specifically for this one, so I'm gonna paint my second one. One thing you guys will notice as I start the second one is there's gonna be a big white stripe in the middle. It's because I wanna add a bow to the top of it, so I've just drawn where the ribbon is gonna be so that I know to not paint over the ribbon. So starting again, we'll use that wet on wet technique, and I'm just painting in my water where I want my color to be. And for this part specifically, you want to make sure that your paper truly has time to soak in the water, but if I lift my page up, I don't want to see any water dripping down. If you find that you have too much, you can use your paintbrush just to pick some of it up. So now that I've done that, I'll jump right in with adding my gold paint. And now because this one is sort of leaning up a little higher, I might actually place my shadow a little bit more on the bottom here. And we are going to add some details to this after, but we're gonna wait for it to dry before we do that. So I can go in and paint my circle here. Okay, so we will be adding more details to these, which is going to make it look more like a bell and less like a weird shape in a little bit. But because I have to let these layers dry before adding more, we're actually going to jump around a bit and we're going to jump to painting our bow. So I am going to do a red bow just because that suits so well for Christmas. Specifically the red that I have here I find can be a little bit bright and almost overpowering. So I am going to tone it down just a bit. The way that I do this is I'm just mixing it onto my palette here. If I add a little bit of blue, it's gonna bring that color down, but just to balance it out, I'll add some orange as well, and it'll give us this really nice deep red. So now that I've done that, I'm gonna go in and paint my bow. I'm gonna start with the knot in the center, and for that I am simply painting a kind of square rectangle shape. I'm sticking with my number 6 brush here. While it's wet, I'm gonna go in with my brighter red and just add it to the top and bottom center. I wanna give it a look like it maybe has a tiny bit of a crease in the middle. So I'm just adding some color into the middle. And now that I've done that, we're gonna go with our red. I'm gonna be careful to give some space to my bow here to let it dry, but I'm gonna start painting the sides of my bow. So I'm going with this sort of half triangle shape, but giving the edges a little bit of a wave, making them a little bit rounded to make this look nice and natural. I'm gonna bring it in to that center point there. And now, while it's wet, we're gonna go in with our brighter red and just kind of carry it in the center. So same idea on the other side. So I'm joining the bow into that center piece there. And then while it's wet, mixing in some of that brighter red into the center, give it a little bit more dimension. I'll add also to this first side just because I want it to be a touch brighter. And now I can go ahead and paint this ribbon coming down. So I'm going to paint it with cut edges specifically, and I'll follow along where I drew my line. And then the other part of my ribbon, I'm just going to have it as if it's falling down behind this other bell. Because we're doing a lot of layering with this painting, we are going to go back and add in more details, but as with everything else, we have to let it dry. So first things first, we will go back to our bell and we're going to work on these circle parts, which you'll be able to really notice the actual shape of it as soon as we do that. So to start, I'm going in with sort of my gold color that I had mixed, and I am just going to paint in my circles on the inside, working around that one there. And then same thing for this one, we'll just work on them both at once. Kind of the easiest that way. Okay, now to make it look like that is the inside of the bell, we need to add some shading. So we're gonna go into our brown paint. I don't find that this paint is quite dark enough. So on my palette here, I'm gonna go in and mix it with some of my blue and touch of red, a little bit more brown there. So now I get a really nice dark, deep brown that I can see when I test it on my palette. So now I'm gonna go into my bell and I am just shading that color along the edges here. So same thing with this one here. Just shading the color along the edges. And if you find that your paint is drying too quick, that's okay. You can always go back in and just add some water. So I want to work on this to get, honestly, almost a black color. Just gonna mix some on my palette here. And with that really dark color, switch to a smaller brush. I'm gonna work right along the edges here. And then using my brush, I can blend in whatever parts didn't. If you're ever blending in, often you actually have to fill the entire area with water again, or you'll find that you'll get sort of these bloom type shading, which isn't always desired when you're painting. Okay, so we're gonna let that dry. While we let that dry, we'll add some more detail to our bells. So going in with a bit of a mixture of my yellow and orange here to get a nice gold color. With my really fine brush, I'm gonna add just some lines across my bell where that curve is. And I'm using not a completely different tone. I'm using the same tone that I've actually painted my bell with. And the idea with that is it's going to give really, really subtle contrast. And it just gives a really nice detail. And then with this exact same color, if I want, I can even go in between and just paint some little dot details. And I got some paint from my other brushes on here, so let me just clean that up quick. So if I go into my clean water, I have a whole video on how to fix mistakes while painting, but this is one of the tricks that I've learned, that if you accidentally get paint somewhere else on your paper, if you work quick enough with some clean water, you often can get most of it to go away. I usually use my paintbrush holder, which helps me from getting my brushes onto my paper. Okay, so to continue our first layer, we're gonna add some branches to our bells. So I'm gonna go into my oxide of chromium green here, and I am just gonna start by painting some really light basic leaves. So with my number 6 brush, you start with a smaller for this part if you want. I'm just painting some really skinny lines that are sort of curved coming out of where the bow is to know where I want to place these leaves. And we're just spreading them out. We're making it nice and full. I like to really fill this up just because if you're using it as a painting in your home, it's nice to have it take up a lot of the paper. So with my really light watered down paint, putting the tip of my paintbrush down, and I'm applying pressure as I pull back in sort of a C curve shape. And we're just painting leaves onto our paper. We're going to add some more Christmassy elements after, but I like to start with this really nice, very light base layer that we can build off of. Just adding a few more leaves. And right away you guys can see how this is starting to come to life. So now that we've added those leaves, I want us to add some pine branches in to really give it more of a Christmassy feel, so we can kind of match the theme of the rest of the painting. So I'm going into my darker green here with my small paintbrush. And for these specifically, I'm gonna do a really thin line coming up and out, and then I am simply just feathering lines out of that center spot. And it's okay if you use a little bit of a dry brushing technique here. And just give it some nice texture. Need a tiny bit more water there. So we'll just scatter some more around. Making it nice and full. It's okay if they overlap our bow a little bit. And we can have them overlapping our bell just a bit as well. Just really working on filling out that space, making it nice and balanced with all of our botanical elements here. And to tie in a little bit of that gold color, I'm gonna go in and just add some very, very faint sort of gold orangey leaves. And I'm just gonna do some really light, longer, skinnier leaves. I'm using my bigger brush, but you guys are welcome to use your number 6 or 8 for this part. And you almost can't see them. It's just a really subtle way to tie in that yellow color. All right, so now we can go back to adding the detail. We're gonna spend a little bit of time working on our bow now with adding more of a brighter contrasted red to just really get some nice detail in here. So I'm mixing my red with some of my burnt sienna and my brown. And starting from the center point here, I'm adding a little bit of shading, and then I actually just want to add some lines coming up with my brush. And I'm gonna go along the edge here as well. And the idea with this is that that's giving that little bit of a ruffle in our ribbon. And then if I want, I can go with some water and just soften the edges. So I wanna go generally with clean water for this, just to make sure that it blends really nicely. And then with that paint, I'm gonna really make those edges stand out. So going along sides, and then as I did with the other parts, we will blend it out. Adding more into that to make it stand out more. So now, exact same concept on the other side, making our red nice and bold. So to blend it out, have a damp brush, and I'm simply just moving the paint around towards the edge And then same with these parts. I'm just adding water and moving the paint around. If you find that it fades out too much, then you can definitely go back in with your brighter paint, just over top of where you want it to stand out. And now, same idea with my bow. I'll add my paint specifically to the one side, and I keep getting more paint on my paper, so let me just clean that off. Okay, so I'm adding that red paint to the one side of my ribbon. Same with this one up here. And then I'll use my number 6 paintbrush just to blend it out a bit. It's easier with a bigger brush for this one to get that nice, smooth fade. And then on the center knot of my bow, back to that smaller paintbrush, I'm simply gonna do 2 little curved lines to kind of show that the ribbon might have a little bit of a fold in it. And now that we've done that, I'm happy with how our ribbon is looking, so we need to finish off our bell now. So we're gonna go into kind of a mix of our burnt umber and burnt sienna paints, and we're gonna paint the lines that are attaching our bell. And I can actually just kind of go around the circle a little bit, and I'm gonna blend that out in a second here. So doing line, attaching the hanging part of my bell, and then we'll blend it out. Right, now this is one of those paintings where I feel like I could just keep going and adding more and more details. So if you guys are having fun with it and want to keep adding more to it, then by all means, don't stop, keep going. So one of the things that I like to continue work on and build up on is the layering and the shadows and things like that. But at the same time, I'm actually very happy with how this looks, and this is something that would look so adorable hanging in your home. It's very nice to couple with a painting of a wreath as well. But that is all we have for our painting. So if you guys followed along, make sure to take a picture of it, send it to me on Instagram at Alexandra Victoria Studio. I would love to see what you guys painted, so please, please, please do share. Also, if you guys have any video ideas that you really want to see in the new year, leave a comment below and let me know. Lastly, make sure to like this video and subscribe to this channel. Merry Christmas and Happy New Year's!